Mao Zedong, legendary heroic figure of the Chinese Communist Party movement, or genocidal mass-murdering dictator, today on History Monday. Alright guys, welcome back into the channel. Last week we did our first in a long series on the modern day contemporary history of China. Today we're taking the period from the end of World War II all the way up until about 1978, 1979 when Deng Xiaoping takes power. Now importantly, this episode is all about Mao Zedong, or Mao, as many of you might know him. He is the leader of the Chinese Communist Party and the leader of China from 1949 all the way into the late 70s. And instead of taking you through each and every little individual event and high mark and low mark, I want to focus on two primary events. But before we get into that, what I want you guys to know, what I want you guys to understand is when Mao takes power, his conception of what he wants China to be and what he wants the Chinese Communist Party to be is a party dominated by communist, Marxist, Maoist ideology. And so Mao's policies that he institutes for the Chinese people and the Chinese government aren't necessarily dictated by the realities on the ground. They are dictated by his ideological conception of what he wants China to be. And that's Marxist, that's Maoist. And so Mao's ideology, this ideological, almost evangelical fervor with which he will spread communism in China, leads to some catastrophic policy decisions. And so when you think of Mao, remember that ideology is the driving force behind everything that he does. Now, the two events that I'm going to talk about are the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Now, first of all, the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was many things, but what we're going to focus on today is the collectivization of agriculture and the mandated steel industrial production in cities and even in the countryside. So first of all, this agricultural production, basically what Mao did is he created or instituted the policy of mass collectivization, wherein the agricultural land was centralized, put under central control of the government. They prohibited private land, private ownership for any of the peasants. They put all the peasants on these communes, and they said the peasants will work the land and meet the quotas set by the central committee. Now, long story short, this policy proved disastrous. It killed incentive. It fudged a lot of the numbers. There was an incentive to lie about the kind of figures, the kind of quotas you were meeting, but this was creating a false sense of security. And so you had this bad incentivization, this bad cultivation of the ground, and then at the same time, in the late 50s, early 60s, you had a massive drought that hit China. The result being that one of the worst famines, perhaps even the worst famine in human history, hit China between 1958 and 1962. Death tolls range from about 20 million people to 60 million people who died. I mean, think about that. 20 to 60 million people died of starvation and famine because of this collectivization policy. I mean, it was a horrific, horrific scene. It was a horrific time period, and it's captured really well in this book, Mao's Great Famine by Dictator. And again, remember, this was driven by Mao's ideological commitment to communism. And communism said you've got to centralize all the land. People don't have private ownership. It's centrally controlled. And this proved disastrous for agricultural policy. Now, the second feature of the Great Leap Forward was mass industrialization. What did this mean? Mao wanted China to be an international leader in the production of steel. Mao saw steel production, steel quotas, steel tonnage as a high watermark for being able to say your country is industrialized. And so they pushed steel production to the front. They want to prioritize steel production above all else. And so they would take some farmers off of their land. They would make everyone build these sort of kiln brick ovens in the back of their backyards. And basically all across China you had these tiny little backyard ovens cooking up steel for the regime. Needless to say, because people didn't have the expertise or the material to make steel, the steel that was produced was a very bad quality and was not sustainable. The practice wasn't sustainable. And so this combination of focusing on industrialization and this collectivization in the agricultural produced a situation where famine, drought, and death, basically centrally planned genocide, took place. And again, it was all driven because of an ideological commitment to communism. Fast forward a few years into the mid-late 60s, we have the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution comes on the heels of, or is motivated by, Mao's attempt to regain his power and regain his legitimacy in the Communist Party because of the failure of the Great Leap Forward. Now, the Cultural Revolution, simply put again, is that Mao, in trying to revitalize the masses behind his image, behind his own persona, basically accused many people in the Communist Party, Chinese society in general, of not being communist enough, of giving over to capitalist or revisionist ideology. And so what he said is we need to restore violent perpetual revolution to be the sort of ideological undergirder or foundation of the Communist Party. And so Mao pushed for a mass, particularly youth and college movement of people who were violent in stirring up revolution, who were violent in accusing intellectuals or party members of being capitalist or of being revisionist, being enemies of the state. And there was just this fervor that went across China of people dragging out landowners and torturing them in public, or dragging out intellectuals and torturing them in public, dragging out party officials. I mean, the leader who was to come after Mao, Deng Xiaoping, was actually exiled during this period of Cultural Revolution. And even the leader of China today, Xi Jinping, his parents were casualties of the Cultural Revolution. So it just tells you how far and how widespread this revolution and this weeding out of so-called class and political enemies in China took place. And finally, the Cultural Revolution also targeted those traditional aspects of Chinese society like Confucianism and ancestor worship, and said these are antiquated, these are out of date. And so many cultural artifacts, many cultural manuscripts were actually destroyed during this period. It was a terrible period of intellectual and cultural destruction. Fear gripped the nation, disunity gripped the nation, people were afraid to talk, and intellectuals were afraid to publish, party members were afraid to incentivize or innovate because they would be labeled as enemies of the party. And so you had a terrible stagnation period, and you had, some estimates put a couple 100,000, some estimates put 2 to 3 million people who were killed during these imprisonments and public tortures, all in the name of restoring communism, of restoring the so-called pure ideology of Chinese communism. Now, it seems like Mao's legacy was pretty bad during these years, but I will give Mao one important victory, and that is this. Mao was able to unify China, something that hadn't been done for many, many decades, and is no small feat. China is a massive geographical country, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. They were caught under a long period of warlordism, with different regions were attached to different warlords and had different political leaders. Mao, importantly, was able to unify the country. So we can say that as a positive thing, and he was able to institute a single-party government that could actually produce or provide the people with some sort of unified governance, which is no small feat. But that came at the price of his ideological commitment to communism, and the results were horrific in the Great Leap Forward and the famine that resulted in the Cultural Revolution and the death of culture. All right, guys, so that's it for today. What do you think about all this? What do you think about Mao? What is his legacy in your eyes? Can you see any other positives? What do you think about the negatives? What do you think about this ideological commitment? Share the video, guys. Subscribe to the channel. And remember what Mao forgot. Reality always trumps ideology.